Hey there! Today I'm making a video about how neurodivergent conditions may unfortunately be mistaken for fabricated and induced illness. Fabricated and induced illness is sort of a new name for Munchausen by proxy. It's where parents make an illness in their child or pretend that their child has an illness in order to gain attention or potentially financial benefits. Unfortunately, false accusations do occur. I was reading articles about how some parents of autistic children are falsely accused of this atrocity, and it really ruins their lives, because if you're a caring parent who's accused of something as horrible as that, then it can really ruin your life and tear your family apart, because your family may even start doubting you. So false accusations are serious, and sadly there's quite a few reports of them, as I said, in the autism community, but it can also happen in parents who have children with other misunderstood conditions like ME, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and PANDAS. So it's really important to be aware of how there is actually an overlap. Some of the signs of fabricated and induced illness can also be signs of certain conditions. And today I'm mainly going to focus on neuro conditions, PANDAS, just because that's what I have most experience in. Wow! But I do think it's important to see that just because someone has these signs doesn't mean that they are abusing their child. Their child may just have a complex condition. However, saying that FII does exist, however, people are accused way too much because there are a lot of false accusations. Fabricated and induced illness is a real thing. However, there are things that can be confused for it, and that confusion can be incredibly dangerous. So, I've written down some examples of the signs of FII, which is fabricated and induced illness, and I'm going to explain how they may actually not be a sign of FII. They may just be what a child with PANDAS may display, and I'm focusing on PANDAS simply because that's what I have most experience in. I am autistic as well, but I think a lot of these can unfortunately be linked more to PANDAS in some ways, which is unfortunate, as I said, because then more parents are wrongly accused and the children are misunderstood and not getting the appropriate care. So I haven't written these in any specific order, but the first sign of FII is that after an examination, no explanation for the symptoms can be found. This could be that the doctor isn't looking for the right thing, potentially. For example, with PANS and PANDAS, sometimes a person will need a specialised test like the Cunningham panel. Sometimes a child may have a rare genetic disorder or a rare metabolic disorder, which may not be picked up through regular testing. And you'd say that a competent doctor would look into these things. However, not always, unfortunately. There are conditions where the signs can overlap, so there can be a lot of confusion as to what to test for. Just because the test results come back normal doesn't mean that the child doesn't actually have a condition. It may be that the wrong things were tested for. And the Cunningham panel, unfortunately, which is a test that is sometimes used to help determine whether a person may have PANS or PANDAS, that's a test that you're very unlikely to get under the NHS here in the UK, because the lab is in America. So it costs a lot, so people in the UK usually have to pay a lot of money for it, so doctors probably aren't going to do that sort of test. So a person with PANDAS may have complex neurological symptoms, sometimes including loss of coordination, or even seizures and sensory processing issues, personality changes, but regular blood tests and an MRI may not show anything. A person may need a specialised test. Symptoms only appear when a parent is about. Many people with neurodivergent conditions, have symptoms which they mask when they're in public or in school. I used to do this a lot. In primary school, I didn't actually really show any issues for a lot of the time. They were pretty much invisible because I would subconsciously suppress and mask my differences, whereas at home it was a totally different story. I was completely dysfunctional and my OCD compulsions made it virtually impossible for me to do anything. But in school they didn't really see a problem, and that's just one example of how people can mask. So just because the symptoms happen more in the home environment, or happen around the parents more, doesn't mean that it's a problem with the parents or the home environment. It doesn't mean that the parents are causing the symptoms. It could just be that the child feels more comfortable letting their symptoms out at home as they know they won't be judged. The child has had treatments which have either had no effect or have caused a bad effect. BRAC. Now, this is seen as a sign of FII, BRAC, because parent who is inducing or fabricating an illness into their child may not want their child to recover, as they want the attention all the time. However, people who genuinely have conditions can have poor responses to treatments. For example, in terms of PANS and PANDAS, hey, some people with PANS and PANDAS report responding really poorly to the typical interventions used for OCD and Tics, BRAC. BRAC, which is why the correct diagnosis is really important. So a person may be giving antidepressants and antipsychotics and no improvement may be seen because the person may actually need something to address the underlying infection and inflammation. Though some people are lucky and do respond to psychotropic medication. I'm one of the people who luckily do, but not everybody does. After one issue has been resolved, another one pops up. BRAC. People with PANS and PANDAS can have symptoms which change over time. BRAC. And can have symptoms which come and go. So, for example, a person may have tics, rages, and separation anxiety, BRAC, and they may be getting treatment for that, but then they may get an infection and develop loss of coordination, BRAC, and psychosis, for example. So it can seem sometimes like new symptoms keep popping up, but that doesn't mean that the parent's lying. Sometimes a condition can just cause symptoms which change over time, or symptoms can just pile up on top of each other. The parent changes GP surgery often, or it has lots of appointments at different hospitals. BRAC. Now this is seen as a sign of FII because some parents will go doctor shopping to try and get more treatments and diagnoses for their child. However, changing GP surgeries doesn't necessarily mean it's FII, because a parent may change GP surgeries if they're struggling to find a doctor surgery that has a doctor who is understanding of the child's needs, or struggling to find a doctor who is open-minded. Because with PANS PANDAS, you do need an open-minded doctor. There's a lot of stigma around PANS and PANDAS, so if you get stuck at a GP surgery where the GPs there are just not open-minded at all and don't want to listen, then that is not going to be a good place to be. You're not going to get the right support there, unfortunately. So some parents do have to keep changing until they find one that has doctors who genuinely understand. But unfortunately, that can flag suspicions of FII, even though in some cases it isn't that. The parents may also take their children to different hospitals simply because they're trying to find the best specialist. They may be trying to find a doctor who has a lot of experience in diagnosing and treating children who have PANS and PANDAS, but that can be difficult to find because they are very misunderstood conditions, and some doctors just don't specialise in that area. Actually, quite a lot don't, which is really sad. This happens especially if the parents' views on the child's diagnosis and treatment is questioned. Again, PANS and PANDAS are misunderstood, therefore they are commonly misdiagnosed. A doctor may keep saying that the child has classic OCD or Tourette Syndrome or Autism, but the parent may know in their heart that that is not right, because things like OCD and Autism are not supposed to be sudden onset, and they aren't supposed to be triggered by an infection. So in that case, the parent may just be seeing different doctors because they know that what the other doctors are saying is wrong, and they need to find someone who will listen to them. The child's life is being limited beyond what is expected for that condition. So a child may miss a lot of school, for example. There are conditions which can affect someone greatly, and simply because a child is missing a lot of school doesn't mean that that's out of proportion to the way the condition affects someone, because many conditions are a spectrum. One child who has OCD may be able to attend school just fine, whereas another one may feel as if they can't leave the house. And again, that's not a sign of the parents trying to get attention. That can be a genuine experience. OCD from PANS PANDAS, or even when it's not from PANS PANDAS, can be absolutely debilitating. So these conditions can affect someone greatly. Just because a doctor hasn't seen someone who is affected by a condition to such an extent as this child doesn't mean that the parent's exaggerating or making it up. The parent has very good medical knowledge and, wow, I can speak in complex medical terms. This is something that can definitely get someone flagged for FII. However, it doesn't indicate that someone is inducing or fabricating an illness into their fucking child. Sorry, that was a tic. It's probably that the parent has done research because they want to know what's going on with their child. They want to understand their child better in order to support them. Therefore, they have picked up this medical knowledge just from researching. For example, when I was younger, my mum would research lots of different conditions simply to try and find out what was wrong with me because I'd suddenly developed so many different symptoms. And in that case, they want to know what's going on. The doctors honestly weren't helpful. So my parents had to take it upon themselves to research, and from researching they gained medical knowledge. And I must say, by the way, my parents have never been flagged for fabricated induced illness, which I'm very grateful for, but sadly some parents are, which is why I'm making this video, because I've read too many stories about false allegations and it is absolutely heartbreaking. The parent may not seem to worry about their child's medical needs. Most parents actually do worry. They may just not want to show it in front of their child. And that may be why they appear not to be worried, but in the inside they definitely may be. I do also need to clarify that these things that I'm saying, I'm not saying that it's never FII, but I'm just saying that there is actually a different side to these traits, an explanation that may not be fabricated or induced illness. The parent is friendly with doctors until the doctor challenges the child's diagnosis and treatment, and then the parent becomes argumentative. Well, the parent may just be friendly with the doctor because they think that the doctor's going to help their child and find out what's wrong. But it's understandable that a parent would get argumentative when the doctor's gaslighting and not listening and being invalidating. Sadly, that happens a lot. If you listen to the chronic illness community, a lot of people have stories of how they've been mistreated by doctors, and sadly that happens to children as well sometimes. But when it happens to a child, sometimes the blame is put on the parents. The parent tries to get doctors to perform often painful procedures and tests which most parents would never want their child to go through unless it was essential. The thing is here that a parent may believe it's necessary because the parent may have done a lot of research. For example, some parents will research online what their treatments are for PANS and PANDAS, and they may find out about IVIG or plasmapheresis, and their child may have a really severe case. So the parent is absolutely desperate to find something that will help their child and relieve them of their suffering, because PANS and PANDAS can be absolutely debilitating. People may have psychosis, debilitating OCD to the point where they can't do anything and they may not respond to the typical OCD interventions. People may be a shell of who they once were, so the parents are of course going to do anything they can to help their child. So they may try to get their child plasmapheresis or IVIG, for example, going abroad to do that, because in the UK it's hard to get that. But the parent may do that not because they're trying to get attention, not because they are fabricating an illness, not because they want their child to suffer. It's actually because they don't want their child to suffer. It may seem extreme to those who are unaware of PANS PANDAS, like why would you why would you put antibodies in someone or put a tube in someone's neck to take out the blood plasma and filter it? Why would you do that for a kid who has OCD and tics? But PANS PANDAS can cause other symptoms as well, and the OCD and tics can be absolutely debilitating. So a parent is going to do what they can to get their child back and to give their child a quality of life. And although some people may view those interventions as extreme, you probably don't know the whole story. For example, a doctor only sees a child for a little while in their office every now and then, but the parent sees them all the time. So the parent is probably just trying to do what's best for their child. Of course, yes, FII exists, and in some cases this could be FII, but I'm trying to make the point that it is not always FII, and those conclusions should never be jumped to without the perspective of a professional / expert in the said condition that the child has. Despite doctors being certain on a diagnosis, the parent may still go and get many other opinions from other doctors. This is something that also relates to PANS and PANDAS, because PANS and PANDAS are often misdiagnosed as Tourette Syndrome, Autism, OCD, functional neurological disorder, sometimes bipolar disorder. It can mimic many conditions. It's a master at mimicry. But the problem with this is, there's a doctor who, for example, if they are a Tourette specialist, may say this is definitely Tourette's. There's a doctor who may be an autism specialist who says this could be autism. but the parent knows that something isn't right with that. It doesn't fit right. So the parent continues to go and try and find a doctor who knows about PANS and PANDAS, and unfortunately that may get them flagged for FII when they're not inducing the illness or fabricating it. They're just trying to find their child the appropriate care because they feel like their child has been misdiagnosed, and sadly that happens a lot in the PANS and PANDAS community. Misdiagnosis happens. The child has symptoms which can't be explained by any known medical condition. Brackender. It may not be that the child has symptoms which can't be explained by a known medical condition. It may just be that the doctor doesn't have the appropriate knowledge on the medical condition. And you may ask, why am I saying that a doctor may not have appropriate knowledge if they've spent years in medical school? But with PANS and PANDAS, brackender. The training on PANS PANDAS in medical school is very minimal, if any. Brackender. And that's a huge problem because brackender, people with PANS and PANDAS can have a wide range of symptoms. Brackender. And some doctors may be aware of the core symptoms like OCD, brackender, tics, brackender, food restrictions, mood changes and things like that, but they may not be aware, brackender, of how complex the sleep disturbances can be, or how people can lose their coordination, or the extent of the brain fog, brackender, or seizures, brackender, or joint pain, brackender. These are all things that brackender can be part of PANS and PANDAS, but they aren't necessarily seen as the core symptoms. There's less awareness about these symptoms. Brackender. So unless a doctor is like a national expert in PANS and PANDAS, they may not be aware of these symptoms. Brackender. There are also other conditions which can cause a very wide array of different symptoms. Brackender, such as rare genetic conditions and metabolic conditions. Brackender. Ow. And it may not be that the symptoms can't be explained by a condition. It may just be that the condition's rare and misunderstood or just not well known. Medical examinations do not provide evidence of the symptoms that the parents explain. So brackender, it is possible that someone can have brackender, a condition that resembles another issue, and they test intensively for that issue, but nothing can show up. As well as this, there are many chronic illnesses where brackender bubbles, where people may have tests which just don't show anything because it's a clinical diagnosis and not something that's typically diagnosed through testing. So brackender, just because medical tests don't show anything doesn't mean that the child isn't actually ill. Brackender, and that's really important to note. This is similar to something I've already touched upon, but the child has many different symptoms which can change over time. As I said, people with PANS PANDAS can have symptoms which change in each flare. Brackender, again, I'm just using myself as an example because, of course, I know my own story, so I can share that without asking myself permission. But when I was younger, I had brackender, OCD sensory processing issues, tics, separation anxiety, brackender, rages and defiance. But then brackender, when I was 17, I got another infection and the OCD returned, the tics returned, but I also got new symptoms like brain fog, loss of coordination, brackender, loss of sensation throughout my whole body, becoming unaware of my surroundings, having episodes of that, brackender, sleep disturbances, and a lot of other things. So those symptoms were different to the ones I had as a child, but that does not mean that my parents are attention seeking or that my illness is induced. Some conditions are just complex and they change so much. Every day is unpredictable. Extravagant claims are made to the school about the child's health issues. Brackender. The claims may not be extravagant. The child may genuinely have very serious health issues. Brackender, and it's important that the school know about that so that they can support the child appropriately. Brackender. And again, I want to clarify once more that I'm not saying that these things aren't FII, I'm showing the other side of it, in which case it's not FII. Brackender, because there can be a lot of confusion. Brackender if these other sides of the story aren't taken into consideration. Brackender. Sadly, children can be chronically ill, which is a really sad thought, but children can be chronically ill and the parent should never feel afraid of going to see doctors to try and get their child the appropriate care. Like, they shouldn't be afraid of being accused of FII for trying to help their child. The parent may have contacted support groups early on in the brackender child's illness, often prematurely. Who is to say that it's prematurely though? Because surely early support and early intervention is vital. A parent is probably going to do a lot better if they are with a support group very early on than if they join later on, and being in a support group may just indicate that they are trying to support their child the best they can and be understood. And brackender, to learn what works for other people so they can learn what works for their child. The parent may have shared their story in the media. Brackender. Although, yes, this could indicate FII, because Brackender, it's a big way to get attention sometimes. It's not always that at all. Some parents just share their child's story because they know that awareness is really important. So just because a parent shares their child's story in the media doesn't mean it's FII. It may just be that the parent is trying to do a good thing and make a difference. The parent often has a history of anxiety, depression, an eating disorder, self-harm, or a past history of fabricated and induced illness. Brackender. Of course, if there is a past history of confirmed fabricated and induced illness, then that is something that does need to be considered. But Brackender, at the same time, it could be a condition that runs in the family, and the parents may have been wrongly accused before and then maybe wrongly accused again. That's also possible. Brackender, so again, that's something to take into consideration. If multiple children have issues, it doesn't mean FII. It may just be that it's a genetic condition. By saying that the parent often has mental health issues may cause more suspicion to parents who have mental health issues, and therefore they may be more likely to receive the wrong accusations, which then destroys their mental health even further. And also, for example, PANDAS can have a genetic predisposition. The parent may have mental health issues from PANDAS, the same as their child. And for autism as well, a parent may be autistic but may have been undiagnosed, so they ended up developing mental health issues, and now their child is autistic but they're getting accused of FII. So, you shouldn't immediately assume that just because a parent is mentally ill that they're going to induce an illness in their child or fabricate it. It's not like that at all. The last one is that the parent may avoid professionals who disagree with the parent's view of what is wrong with their child. I think this is understandable. You would want to avoid a doctor who is closed-minded, who isn't listening. For example, when I was younger, I had a doctor who said there's no way I have Tourette Syndrome, which, to be fair, now I know that my Tourette's may be a misdiagnosis and that my tics may be caused by PANS, but the doctor was very invalidating and condescending, and the doctor just wasn't listening. And of course, we wanted to avoid them. We didn't, but we wanted to, because they were causing harm. They were invalidating me, and that invalidation stuck with me for years. So of course a parent's going to want to protect their child and avoid an invalidating doctor, or avoid a doctor who is closed-minded and stuck in their ways, or avoid a doctor who just doesn't seem like they're going to help because they are not listening and not taking the parents' views into consideration. It may not be FII, it may be that the doctor is closed-minded and the parent just doesn't want their child to be around that, so they try to find other doctors who will listen. There is an organisation in the UK called FII Back, which supports families who have been wrongly accused of fabricated and induced illness. I don't have experience with this organisation, but they may be worth contacting if you've been wrongly accused and may be at risk of losing your child due to that. Their blog is also worth reading. There are quite a few articles online where families who have been wrongly accused have shared their story, so I recommend reading up on this if you are interested. I'm extremely grateful that my family has never been accused of FII, but this is still a topic that I wanted to cover because it's extremely important.